Hey friends, welcome back to my channel. My name is Jamie and today we are taking a look at some of the Literally Dead Book Club Backlog reads from 2022. Okay, first for a little bit of context, prior to this year, 2022, I have not really been interested in reading thriller and horror, or I kind of was interested, but I just didn't know where to start because that genre, both of those genres, are just really saturated, and I really did not know where to start or where to look. And so earlier this year, in July, I wanted to do a kind of like an experiment where I read a bunch of different horror thriller books and I tried to find which ones I liked. And this was before I had my booktube channel, but I was trying to start my booktube channel in summer and I didn't end up doing it until September, but let's just say that did not go super well. I don't know whether it was the marketing or just the way people were talking about this or the circles that this was running in that made me feel like this was going to be a thriller, but it is most certainly not a thriller. Surprise to no one, I did not like it. Yeah, there was several books that I read for that experiment that just really weren't my taste. A couple that were okay. So at this point I was like, well, this experiment is just not going well at all. I think I need some help. And that is when I discovered the Literally Dead Book Club, created by Books and Lala. And now I'm wearing the merch. I have really enjoyed going through the backlog of Literally Dead Book Club picks and also following along in real time. So these are the ones that jumped out at me. I was kind of reading on a purely interest of the premise basis, and I think it's really helped me to discover what I like and what I don't like in horror and thriller novels. We will go from kind of oldest book to newest book that I read. Again, I didn't read every single book in the backlog. I was just going off of the ones that I felt like were really interesting to me. And I might continue to go back and see if there's others that fit in more of the parameters that I've learned that I enjoy. The first book we'll talk about is The Death of Jane Lawrence by Caitlin Starling. This was the Literally Dead Book Club pick for November-December of 2021. I chose to read this as one of my Literally Dead Book Club picks because I already had it on my shelf. Actually, I bought this I believe in January or December or January of 2022. I was just immediately taken with the cover. I really loved it. This is a gothic, supernatural, horror thriller. So all the buzzwords. But mainly it's a gothic sort of retelling or interpretation of Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, a book I absolutely love. Daphne du Maurier, I absolutely adore her, so I was immediately very interested in this. I did know that there was a supernatural element, but mostly I was interested in the idea of a gothic story because I think they're always just so much fun. The general consensus from the Literally Dead Book Club members was that this was not too much of a hit, actually. And this, I think the reviews I have seen around for this have been kind of not great, unfortunately. And my thoughts after reading this, I read this very recently, I think just a couple months ago. And my thoughts on reading this are very interesting because I had an okay time with this. I actually didn't hate it, which it's kind of surprising because I think I would have, aligned with people that really disliked this. But what I could appreciate was the writing and the writing style. I thought Caitlin Starling did a really amazing job with the writing itself, which is a big hurdle for me. A lot of the times the reason that I don't love thrillers and horror is because the writing is just really basic and just kind of cringy to read. But that's not the case here. However, this book really just goes into way too much detail about a lot of things. It's kind of a slog to get through, and the plot is extremely tedious and just a little bit convoluted. The magic system is not super explained, and it does get difficult to follow. However, like, a lot of things happen. There's constantly moving things. I wouldn't say that this is a slow book necessarily. There's a lot of things happening. There's horror-ish scenes, and there's like a lot of imagery that I found just kind of, it was good horror. But I think it struggled to put all of those scenes together into something cohesive and something that made sense. But I will say, I really did see the skeleton of Rebecca throughout this entire book. I know that story really well, and I can really see the influence that that had on this book. And it was really fun to see how Caitlin Starling interpreted some of those Rebecca moments and how they were changed to make sense in this story. So while I did not love this by any means, and I'm not really sure who I could potentially recommend this to, unless maybe someone who was really, really just loved ultra detailed writing and supernatural fantasy elements, maybe then. But I have to say, I will give credit where credit is due to the craft of this book. However, just not the most entertaining thing. Next up, we have Razorblade Tears by S.A. Cosby, and this was a February 2022 Literally Dead book club pick. Here is yet another instance of an older Literally Dead book club pick, but a recent read for me. I just finished reading this in November, and wow. I was really, really impressed with this, and it kind of makes sense because this is not exactly your typical thriller, and it's certainly not horror. This is a contemporary literary fiction slash thriller, thrilling elements, but mostly it's literary fiction, so does make sense why I would like it, because I'm a literary fiction reader, so this one that's very closely tied to literary fiction is definitely a highlight of my reading experience. Razorblade Tears follows the story of two fathers, one black and one white, after their two sons, who were married to each other, were killed in a terrible act of homophobic violence. These two fathers, both of them who are ex-convicts, come together and decide that they need to get vengeance for their son's death, and they set out to seek the people who killed their sons to, well, attempt to murder them back, basically. This book deals with a lot of really heavy themes. There's a lot of instances of very graphic violence. So if you are not one to stomach just extremely graphic scenes, I would probably skip this one. But if you can get past that goriness, this book really does a very good job of dealing with themes of masculinity, of homophobic violence and prejudice. It deals with race. It deals with issues of just the LGBTQ plus experience and poverty, and just the list goes on. And what I think is really amazing is that sometimes when you get a literary fiction book that's trying to tackle a lot of themes, it kind of feels like it's just, have a bullet point list and it has to get every single theme in that book, and it kind of crams stuff in there that doesn't feel natural. That is not the case here. Each theme is in here for a very specific reason. It has a place in the story arc, in the character's development. Everything is meticulously placed and plotted, and also it was just a really entertaining and engaging story, because there is a mystery element to this. The two fathers have to figure out who killed their son, and in order to do that, they have to go into their son's community, into their life, and it's just a really moving story. Again, if you can get past the goriness of it, this is a great read. Next up, we have what is considered to be a Literally Dead book club favorite, all-time favorite. That is Confessions by Kanae Minato. While I was doing my Literally Dead book club backlog read, I kept hearing that Confessions was the book that the most Literally Dead book club readers absolutely loved. I heard it was a 5-star read for nearly everyone, and really this just piqued my interest. This, until I saw it on Literally Dead Book Club, is not necessarily a well-known book, at least in America. This is by a Japanese author. But after it was picked up by Literally Dead Book Club, I think a lot of people have since discovered it, and so did I. And thank goodness that I did, because this book blew my mind. Confessions is a multi-perspective mystery thriller. I really don't even know exactly how to classify this book. In typical fashion of Japanese storytelling, it does not follow a perfectly linear story with, you see your little plot map graph that's typically found in Western stories. It doesn't really follow that. It really kind of works in its own way. And I think just the refreshing change of pace in the story structure is immediately what stands out about this book. But also, this book has a twist ending at every single chapter. You just cannot guess where this book is going to go, and it just makes for a really, really fun time. This follows the story of a middle school teacher who informs her class that her young 3-year-old daughter has died. She has drowned in the school pool, and she believes that her students, specifically 2 of them, are involved in the killing of her daughter. And what unfolds from there is just an absurd, delightful, thrilling adventure ride. I can't even really describe this. You really just have to read it for yourself. And honestly, the less you know, the better. Just pick this up and give it a try, because you will read it in one sitting. Okay, moving from May 2022 to June 2022, that book was Hide by Kiersten White. Another book that I definitely wanted to pick up because of this cover, which is absolutely gorgeous. This is my library copy, but I'm almost tempted to buy a copy for myself because I do love this cover so much, but unfortunately, the book was not very good. Hide has all of the buzzwords that I was really looking for in a horror thriller experience. This is a supernatural thriller that takes place in an amusement park, and it's a survival game. All of those things, I love anything that has to do with a survival game of any kind. I'm definitely on board for that, and I know I'm not alone in that. I know that's one of the most popular elements in thriller horror. I certainly was all about it. And then you add that it takes place at an abandoned amusement park, and that is just a recipe for fantastic, gory fun. However, I think a big issue with this book is that this is marketed for adults. This is an adult horror novel, and it just reads like YA in all of the worst ways. I hate YA. I don't read YA, and I find that the writing is just particularly bad in that genre, and I don't know why. I don't know if it's because it's marketed towards younger people, or the authors are thinking, oh, they're younger and therefore they need to have everything spelled out to you. Anyway, it's not my thing, but this reads like YA. And what I mean by that is that our main character is very basic. The other characters are very one-dimensional. We have a lot of things told to us rather than shown to us. There's not a lot of discoveries to be made. It's just very, very standard, basic. Just honestly, you just turn off your brain and read this, because if you think too much about any of it, the whole thing falls apart. And honestly, I hate to sound so mean about it. Do I think this is the worst thing ever written? No, it's just very underbaked. It's just a very, this is an idea that someone had, and it doesn't really feel like any effort was put into actually executing the idea. And I think a big thing for people also was that I don't think a lot of people realized this was a supernatural horror, so maybe people were going in expecting an abandoned amusement park survival game, and they got the big reveal of what was going on, and it is, certainly out there if you're not prepared to go in reading a supernatural horror. And also, as Kayla from Books and Lala herself stated, her main issue with this book was that it didn't really utilize the set piece of the abandoned theme park enough, and I can see that. I can see that for sure. I did feel like there were parts that I thought were really interesting that's to do with the theme park. And also, this is my library copy, so I can't really like open it. But actually in the book, there is a map of the theme park, and the drawings are like pretty creepy, actually. So the map really helped me to visualize what was going on. Yeah, unfortunately this was not a hit, but whoever designed this cover, just props to you, because this is fantastic. Following the June 2022 pick, the July 2022 Literally Dead book club pick was House Across the Lake by Riley Sager. Riley Sager has been a reoccurring author for Literally Dead book club picks, and honestly it makes sense because he has a chokehold on the thriller horror genre. Of course, before I started reading horror thriller, I knew who Riley Sager was. I've seen his books around, those iconic neon colored covers with the handwritten writing. Like, we all know Riley Sager. And my immediate impression of Riley Sager was kind of just popcorn thrillers, like kind of just turn off your brain and read a crazy story. I was not wrong. So I did not read House Across the Lake because Riley Sager has been featured so many months in Literally Dead Book Club. A lot of his books made it on the list. I decided I would just pick the one that sounds the most interesting to me and also try to get one that has like a generally higher rating. So I read Lock Every Door. What I was expecting is exactly what I got in the case of this Riley Sager story. That is, until the very end. This book follows our protagonist, who is a young woman, really down on her luck, and she takes a job at an apartment complex where she's told that all she has to do to make a lot of money is to just stay in the apartment and like house sit, basically, and it's owned by this really rich person, and all she has to do is just stay there for a couple weeks, and then she'll get like a bunch of money. So she says, yeah, I mean, sure, that's kind of a fishy thing to ask, but whatever, it's a lot of money, so I'll do it. And things are not what they seem. I'll say that. It turns into an extremely wild, like absolutely off the rails thrill ride, and unfortunately the writing was just too basic for me to get past. I was rolling my eyes the entire time. Like, the characters are basic and uninteresting, and the premise was very loose at best. There wasn't a lot of tension, really, but towards the end, things started to get absolutely insane. I did not enjoy this book, really. I thought it was just, like, very, very, again, like, underbaked, just genre fiction, basic, boring. But I will give credit to Riley Sager for the ending, because it does a really fun thing with the perspective that I was not expecting at all, and I thought it was really clever, actually. And while I think the end was completely ridiculous, I still thought that that little writing bit was quite clever, so I'll give it credit for that. But yeah, that was my first and only Riley Sager. He's not for me, and it seems that his general impressions, I think that how people really feel about him, are just kind of going down. I know people really did not enjoy House Across the Lake, and I don't know. Is he going to stick around? Is he going to break out of his comfort zone? We don't know, but I will be on the lookout, just out of genuine curiosity. Okay, next to last, this was the October 2022 Literally Dead Book Club pick. That is You're Invited by Amanda Jayatissa. Once again, we have a contemporary thriller, contemporary semi-domestic, I guess you could call it domestic, but contemporary domestic thriller, which, as I have learned from reading Megan Miranda, this is not my type of book at all. So I think that it has to be taken into consideration that I'm really not the target audience for this book. I had an okay time with this. What did interest me is the fact that this is a thriller that takes place at a wedding, and specifically a Sri Lankan wedding. So I love a thriller that takes place at a wedding. I love a wedding setting in general because I just think there's so much to be done and so much drama involving all of the family members, and you're leading up to this big event, so there's this like natural kind of like urgency to the story. I love anything that leads up to a big event, and a wedding is just peak drama. So I was definitely interested in that. And then on top of that, you add a Sri Lankan wedding, and we get a lot of things in this story that have to do with Sri Lankan culture. So that was really fun to read about. The story, however, I think it was okay. It was just okay. I thought there was an idea here for a thriller that takes place at a wedding. Essentially, what happens in this story is that our protagonist is the ex-best friend of the bride, and the bride is marrying our protagonist's ex-boyfriend. That was hard to say. And our protagonist gets invited to the wedding completely out of the blue. She does not talk to either of these two people anymore, and she gets a wedding invitation. She's surprised about it, and then once she gets there, some things unfold, and she is going to be accused of a murder. So that is a really fun setup, and I was all about that setup. However, our protagonist is just very difficult to follow. And what I mean by that is that she's just quite annoying. She does not have an engaging personality to read. She's, in fact, like, she's equally kind of like obsessed with the bride, but also just generally uninterested in anything. So it makes her like just very hard to root for. Her motivations are very unclear, and it makes it really difficult for us to want her to succeed in this thing that she's trying to do. I think it would have been way better if this story would have been told from the bride's perspective, and it follows the bride as her ex-best friend and her fiance's ex-girlfriend suddenly appears at this wedding out of the blue, and all of these crazy things start happening, and she's like trying to figure out what's going on. I think that would have been kind of more interesting, but instead, the way it is, it's just fine. There's a lot of like things that don't have to do with the plot that I enjoyed in this book, and then when it came to the plot, it was just kind of standard. But I do know that a lot of the Literally Dead book club members, so people who actually are the target audience for this book, really enjoyed this. So if you do enjoy contemporary domestic thrillers, I know this was a hit for a lot of people. And last but not least is the November 2022 Literally Dead book club pick, House of Hunger by Alexis Henderson. I won't talk too much about this because I actually have an entire review on my channel for this book. I reviewed it right when it came out. I was so excited. I was like the first person from my library to get a copy of it, so that was exciting for me. But this is a gothic horror that follows a fictional country in kind of like the 1800s. And it follows our protagonist, who becomes a blood maiden for the Countess Elizabeth. And a blood maiden is a young woman who actually gives her blood for consumption to the Countess. So basically vampires, but not exactly. They're not called vampires, and they're human, to my understanding. But yes, there is drinking of blood. There's, as typical with vampire stories and gothic stories, there's a lot of like sexual tension, and this is a lesbian gothic romance / horror. I don't know if I would actually say romance, but it's definitely giving kind of that really dark, forbidden romance vibe. And again, if you want to hear my entire thought on that story, check out my video on my channel. But the impression for this book, and for how the Literally Dead book club felt about it, was pretty much everyone really enjoyed this. So if you are into dark, gothic, just indulgent vampire stories, give this a try. Whew, okay, there you go. That is all of the Literally Dead book club picks that I read in 2022. I had so much fun. Really what I love about this was joining the community and having a book that a lot of people are chatting about that month, and also just figuring out what I like and don't like in horror and thriller. And I think that the conclusion that I've come to is that I really like my horror and thriller with a bit of a literary element. I like there to be some substance to the story. And I've since actually read several horror and thriller books that were not Literally Dead book club picks, but I did know that they were endorsed by Literally Dead book club members. So I'm still continuing on my journey with horror and thriller. So if there are any other picks that I didn't read that I should read, please let me know. If you have any personal horror thriller recommendations based on kind of my attitude towards what I've read so far, please let me know. Otherwise, thank you guys so much for watching. This was such a fun experiment that was done all of 2022, and I can't wait to see what 2023 has in store.